have our speaker, Mr. Chandramouli, online right now. He is going to speak on e-surveillance with machine learning for regulatory risk assessment. R. Chandramouli, Mouli as he is called, is the Thomas Hattrick Chair Professor of Information Systems in Electrical and Computer Engineering at Stevens Institute of Technology. He is the founding director of NSF SAVI, Institute for Cognitive Networking, and the co-director of Information Networks and Security Laboratory. Prior to joining Stevens, he was on ECE faculty at the Iowa State University, Ames. His research covers cognitive radio networking, dynamic spectrum management, access, text analytics and forensics, social media analytics and security, and prototyping experimental research in these areas. His research and technology commercialization projects are funded by the National Science Foundation, National Institute of Justice, Department of Defense, and the industry. Thank you, Mr. Chandramouli, for coming online. You can take over from now.
Thank you for the introduction. First, let me apologize for the mix-up with respect to the time. I guess I had my calendar off by 15 minutes, so I couldn't give the talk earlier, but at least I'm happy that it's worked out. So I know it's getting late in Chennai, so let me jump into the talk directly. So today I'm going to talk about some of the issues in e-surveillance, electronic surveillance with machine learning, especially as applied to financial services industry. Right? I'm going to talk about some of our research as well as tools we have developed and licensing it to the industry right now. So what is the big problem? So the problem is, one of the problems is trade surveillance, right? So trade surveillance basically helps the financial industry, like banks, for example, or regulators. It gives them the capability to identify, prevent rogue trading, market abuse, and misconduct, right? So there are a couple of focus areas. One is, let's say, unauthorized trading. So here there are traders, right? They try to go around mechanisms, like, for example, they try to go around government regulations to hide risky trading, correct? Or they try to distort the risk exposure to their clients, or they try to use fraudulent accounting practices to mask profits and losses, right? Now, the second issue is market manipulation and abuse. So here traders, they collude with each other, right? Pump and dump, you must have heard about it. So what they try to do is they artificially boost the market, and then at the end of the day, they sell all the shares for a huge profit, right? So it's collusion. Of course, the LIBOR market manipulation is a very famous case. So the idea is, how do we identify rogue traders? How do we do trade surveillance? How do we identify these fraudulent activities using machine learning? So our goal is a holistic approach, not a piecemeal approach, right? So there are many factors which we have to consider. Of course, it's sort of an exhaustive list. So each topic by itself is a research area. So in trade surveillance, we want to look for what's called wash trading, insider trading, right? So someone who works for a company, they have some additional information, they exploit that for profit, and so on and so forth. Then there's control room issues like, let's say, personal account trading or conflicts of interest, right? And financial crime compliance, bribery and corruption, right? So let's say you have a banking client, transfers a large amount of money to an offshore account or gives bribe to somebody. So, or terrorist financing. So how do we identify these sort of accounting, these sort of transactions, right? So that's extremely important, not only for the bank, but also for the national security. And in other types of holistic approaches include electronic communications. So analyzing emails, right? Monitoring emails, monitoring WhatsApp, for example, phone calls, right? IM, instant messaging, chat rooms, and so on and so forth. So as you can see from the slide, there are any number of ways in which we could look at trade surveillance. But for this talk, I'm going to talk about electronic communications or e-surveillance. So before we jump into the technical details, what are some of the major challenges, right, for surveillance? For example, in the audience, you may have researchers, we may have students. So maybe they're looking for a master's thesis project or a PhD research project. So this identifies some of the major research issues. Also, if there are startups or someone who wants to launch their own startup in the audience, these are some of the topics where you might want to consider starting a company, right? Because big banks, especially in the US and Europe, they're very interested in these topics, right? They're looking for tools, software tools that can help them do these things. So in terms of unauthorized trading and market abuse, right, rogue trading. So rogue trading, right, it poses a huge risk for a financial bank, right? It could come with monetary losses, right, could have regulatory repercussions. For example, the government or the regulatory agency might fine a bank, for example, for selling fraudulent mortgages to their clients, right? Again, the financial crisis in the US, one of the reasons was from, banks trying to sell fraudulent mortgages. Of course, I think we talked about this collusion in the marketplace. So a bunch of traders, they get together, they collude, they artificially boost the market, they make huge profit, and then they sell everything, right? So people lose a lot of money. So how do we identify that this is an artificial boost to the market because of a bunch of traders rather than a natural evolution of the market, right? So given all these different, so clearly malicious behavior is extremely complex because there's humans involved, there are machines involved, right? High-speed trading, so algorithm involved. So it's a very complex human-machine interactive process. So therefore, what happens is identifying collusion or identifying fraudulent trades and so on, it's an extremely difficult and challenging process. It's a very complex process to even monitor. So of course, adding to the complexity, you also have multiple data sources, right? So it could be structured data. So structured data is, you could have all the accounting, correct? You could have unstructured data like voice, traders talking to each other on the phone, or it could be email exchanges, it could be chat room sessions. So these are unstructured data. So how do we identify fraud from both structured as well as unstructured data? So a lot of companies have been looking at structured data. They look, because you have very experienced accountants, they look for patterns in accounting to identify accounting fraud. But the key challenge is how do we identify fraud or market abuse from unstructured data? So for example, if we have 1 million emails exchanged between 100 employees in a bank, or let's say you have 1,000 emails exchanged between 2 traders, how do we identify that they are up to something, that they're trying to collude and and they're planning to cheat the people, right? So that is one of the issues we try to look at. So clearly there is no holistic silver bullet solution, right? So we have to look at these issues separately and then somehow merge them into a software tool, for example, that will provide a holistic view of fraud in financial services industry. So clearly, time is of essence. So we would want to identify fraud and abuse almost in real time. Again, so regulators, financial regulators, they're cracking down, but they do not have the necessary tools to identify these frauds. Typically, they identify fraud after it has happened. In fact, maybe even a year, 2 years after the crime has happened, right? So here are some examples of regulatory fines, right? So you have UBS, they were fined $2.3 billion for index future trades. JP Morgan was fined $5.8 billion for credit derivatives index trades. And for market, UBS again was fined another $1.5 billion for manipulating LIBOR. Robobank was fined $1 billion for manipulating LIBOR. So these are, so as you can see, the fines are humongous, right? It's extremely expensive process for banks. So how do we use big data? How do we use machine learning to solve some of these problems and help these financial regulators as well as financial services companies like banks? I think you must have seen this big data, right? The usual 3 V's. You have volume of data is very large. Variety of data, as I said, it could be voice, it could be text, it could be images, it could be video, accounting data, and so on and so forth. So you have a variety of data and velocity of data. You have this data coming in at a very high rate. So then the challenge becomes, how do we extract from this very noisy data, how do we extract useful signals that identify fraud, identifies financial crimes, bribery, corruption, terrorist financing, and so on and so forth, right? So that's where the challenge is. So the 3 questions we ask ourselves are, what is the hidden value in the data set? What can I know now that I didn't know before? And how do I do all this in a constrained environment? When I say constraints, it could be time constraint, right? You might want to do this in real time or within a day or 2 days or within a week, not after several years. Or it could be computational constraints, it could be an expensive cost constraint, and so on and so forth, right? So our view of developing a holistic surveillance is captured in this slide. So we look at trading activity. So we look at real-time trade analysis, right? So financial performance. So the profit and loss exposure, has it changed dramatically? Suddenly, are we seeing a lot of profits? If yes, why? Or are we seeing a lot of losses? If yes, why? And how many orders were canceled and corrected, right? So this again happens when traders collude. So transaction performance. We look at market benchmarking. Suddenly, are we seeing that the market index is going up, right? Or it's going down suddenly. So why is that happening? And communications. So when I say communications, we look at emails. So are there certain sentences, words, phrases used in these emails that could trigger suspicious activities? Documents, so are they sharing confidential information? So employees in a bank, are they sharing some information that they're not supposed to? Social media, right? How is social media being used? On Facebook, are they exchanging messages? On Twitter, are they exchanging messages? What do they talk about? Voice, right? What are they sharing in the phone calls? And again, what are they sending each other by SMS? Again, when I say it could mean, in this case, employees of a bank, traders in an organization, and so on. We also want to look at behavioral analysis. So trade behavioral data. So what systems do they access? So for example, you suddenly find an employee is trying to log into their bank account, let's say around midnight, right? Then that raises suspicion. What is a pattern? What's going on there? And social network. So within a bank, you have again employees or a bank manager. On Facebook, is the bank manager connected to certain people that they are not supposed to be connected to? Or if they're connected to someone, right? And if you look at their social profile, that could raise some suspicion as well. HR data. So how many hours of professional training is being given to the bank employees, for example, right? Are they compliant with the HR policies? So these are all some of the issues that we have to look into. So integrated surveillance, innovation in that space is basically joining the dots. So it sort of summarizes what you have discussed so far. So if you look at an employee, you want to look at their trading practices, their sales practices, their conduct, travel expenses. Are they suddenly going to visiting locations that typically they do not visit, right? What is their social media profile? What are they talking about in their emails and so on? Again, from a client perspective, is the client giving gifts? Are they filing for bankruptcy suddenly? Are there financial crimes? Are they giving bribes, terrorist financing, right? These are all the issues. So we want to connect all these dots and then come up with algorithms that can combine, using machine learning, and combine the information knowledge that we extract from each of the individual bullet points. So one example is voice surveillance, right? So as you know, many banks are beginning to offer voice recognition technology to replace passwords. So for example, I could have a Bank of America mobile app running on my phone, and if I want to access my bank account, instead of typing my login password, I can just speak to the app. The mobile app recognizes my voice and then says, "Oh, this is Mauli," and then it will log me into the mobile app. Then I'll be able to see my account, transactions, and so on. But there's a huge risk involved in this. So companies like Lyrebird, they claim that they can recreate any voice using just 1 minute of sample audio. So for example, I'm giving this talk today for, let's say, 30 minutes, 40 minutes. So you take 1 minute sample of my audio, and then you send that to this algorithm, and then it will recreate my voice that sounds very much like me. And so after that, what happens is, it's called voice synthesis. So given any text document, the software can read the text as if I'm reading it in my voice, right? So for a human, it'll be extremely difficult for them to identify this is not really me that's talking, but it's actually a machine that's talking like me. And of course, right, I think you all know about fake videos, right? So people cut and paste someone's head with someone's body, and then there's all these fake videos that goes on WhatsApp, YouTube. So how do we identify fake video? That's a huge challenge, and this is fake audio. This is an immense challenge for financial services firms. So I'm not sure if you have an audio connection there, but I'm going to play a human voice. I hope you can hear this.
Well, was it?
It's a very short sample.
Well, was it?
I hope you heard it, right? This is a human voice. Now I'm going to play a synthesized fake voice, synthesized by an algorithm. So see if you can identify that this is fake. It's not a human, it's actually a machine.
I would be interested in another attempt.
Okay, let me play it again.
I would be interested in another attempt.
So if you listen to the fake machine synthesized voice, right, it's extremely difficult for someone untrained or even for someone trained to identify between human voice and synthesized fake voice, correct? So then the challenge becomes, how do we identify? So given the synthesized fake voice, how do we identify using machine learning, this is actually fake voice and not a real human being? So we have developed machine learning, deep learning algorithms that can classify, given a 10, 15 seconds sample, audio sample, we can identify if it's a human voice or a fake voice. And so how banks would be using this is they would install our software tool along with their mobile app. And let's say instead of you speaking to the mobile app for voice biometric password, if the synthesized voice is being played, our app will identify and alert the banking app that this is not a human voice, this is a synthesized voice, so do not allow this person to log into the account, right? So that's one way to do it. So we've also been looking at what's called natural language processing, right? NLP, and then stochastic modeling, statistical modeling of text, and so on and so forth. And then we identify illicit emails, suspect emails, coded messages, and so on and so forth. So some of the ideas we use are from text mining, digital forensics, principal component analysis, right, and so on. And the type of data we look at includes communication and social network data, and we also do deep emotion analysis, deceptive behavior, and so on. Right? So we looked at various types of data sets, the Enron email data set, Hillary Clinton's speeches, US election, social media data, and so on. And also we developed a suspect behavior detector app. I'll just show you a couple of screenshots, and if anyone is interested, we can do a full-blown demo of the app, which is currently being licensed to major companies here in New York. So the suspect behavior app has a number of capabilities. The first is it can integrate multiple data sources to produce a holistic surveillance view. So you can put in emails, text, voice messages, and so on. Then it does a lot of analytics using machine learning. As I said, I can obtain significant insight into illicit behavior through communication surveillance, sentiment extraction, emotion analysis. Then you can track risky and fraudulent activities, right? You can track risk. There's a risk score that's put out for every employee. And of course, we also work very closely with Accenture, and where we develop some of these AI assets, Accenture in New York City. So let me just go through one example. So we looked at the Enron email data set, which has, and there are 150 employees in the data set. We looked at 22 employees who were actually found to be guilty in the court of law. We also looked at 20 other senior employees within Enron, like VPs, managers, and so on, who were found not guilty by the court. And then we wanted to identify, is there a difference between the way the people who are found guilty wrote their emails to their employees or to their colleagues compared to the non-guilty ones wrote, right? So that gives us some idea. So we also looked at illicit and suspect or sensitive information in emails, oddity, substitution in language, and so on and so forth. So there are a number of filters that we develop, right? One is, of course, all based on machine learning, the content filter, then suspect information detection, similarity comparison, and emotion analysis. I'll go through some of these filters in the next few slides. So a content filter is typically, it looks for words and phrases to analyze email content, right? So then it identifies emails that need a secondary look, right? So let's say you have 1 million emails. This will do a very high-level search and then find emails that look suspicious at the first cut, right? So that will basically be triggered, and then it goes through a second round of filtering and second round of analysis. So for example, in the Enron email data set, we looked at financial activities like buy, hold, transactions, people talking about budget, they talk about bankruptcy and so on. Then there were code names for people, right, like fat boy and so on. So these emails were triggered by the content filter. And then what we did was we developed algorithms using what's called high-dimensional matrix factorization approaches to identify emails that could potentially be fraudulent emails. So in this example, what you're seeing in the picture is the blue dots are normal emails, and then the red dots, which on the surface of this three-dimensional picture, these are emails that had hidden messages. So for example, these emails were released by the accounting and auditing enforcement releases by the US government. So the red emails basically had coded language. So people are talking about, instead of buying and selling stocks, they were saying, hey, let's buy 1 kilo of potato today. So two traders, they talk about buying and selling potatoes, correct? So that should raise suspicion. Why are these traders talking about buying and selling potatoes? Are they trading in potatoes, or are they trading something else? And so our algorithm was able to compute and able to identify all those emails that were fraudulent or suspicious emails, and the blue ones were normal emails, right? So again, so this is the power of machine learning. So we could identify, again, in this case, we do not have any training data because we had only a few examples of these illicit emails. So we can't use traditional machine learning algorithms to train data, classify, and so on, right? So we can't do that, and so we took a different approach and used a statistical technique to do this. Then similarity comparison. So let's say, for example, in a bank, you're monitoring all the employees' emails. So there's, let's say, 100,000 employees in a bank, geographically distributed. You are monitoring every employee, and you're monitoring each and every email that is sent or received by the bank employees, right? So there is no privacy here. When you work for a bank, you sign out of privacy, right? Banks own all your communication data. So what we do is, let's say if in the past, we have found a certain types of emails to be fraudulent, to indicate fraud. Now, we use those emails and then we look for, given any new email, we try to identify similarity patterns and then try to see, well, is there semantic similarity? Is there structural similarity? So is this email, a bunch of emails, is it fraud that we saw 5 years ago? Is it similar to that, right? So we can identify fraudulent patterns based on past emails, past behavior. Of course, one other way of doing detecting fraud is through emotion analysis. So let's say we have a trader or a bank employee, right? And then you sell your stocks, and suppose you made huge losses. Suppose you lost, let's say, 5 lakh rupees, 10 lakh rupees, correct? So then what we could naturally expect is maybe this employee, because of the huge financial loss, is really stressed out, right? So their emotions could be different. They could be very sad, they could be depressed, they could be angry that they lost the money, and so on. So then we started looking for indicators in their emails, in their instant chats, or our Facebook posts, or phone calls. Are they beginning to show signs of stress? Because we do not know that they have lost, right? As a surveillance tool may not know that they have lost money in the stock market, but they suddenly see that, okay, this employee was happy like the last 1 month. Suddenly you start seeing a lot of anger in the email, a lot of depression, sadness in the email. So the sudden change of mood indicates that this employee is going through some sort of a mental stress. So then can that be used to identify it, to closely monitor that employee? Because then that employee is more prone to indulge in risky trades, right? So what we do is we define 8 emotional states: angry, anxious, certain, optimistic, positive, negative, sad, and tentative. We use ideas from psychology and psycholinguistics, combine that with machine learning. So here is one example. So I sure hope we make good use of the bad use about Skilling's resignation. So this email is from Watkins. So she was I think CFO at Enron, right? So this is an actual email. And then if we look at her email, we extract all these emotional states. We find 27% she was negative. Right? Then we should probably closely monitor that employee, right? It could also so happen that if one employee is negative, let's say it's a bank manager who's very negative, and then he or she could be treating their employees badly as well, and so this negativity could spread within the enterprise. And if it spreads, then the risk to the bank or risk to the organization, to the enterprise, increases as well. So here are more examples. We look at different emails from each employee. In this case, Sharon Watkins. So it says that, okay, 25% anxious, then 40% positive, and so on, right? So this is different emails from one employee. And this is a time series that shows the percentage of emotional change in the emails from one employee in an organization or enterprise. And then we compute what are called prime emotions. Prime emotions are the dominant emotions. So we look at the percentages that have the maximum, right, the maximum percentage, right? And then we look for how this changes. So for example, if the prime emotion was optimism, right, positivity, and then suddenly it changes to negativity, tentativeness, and sadness, then this person is going through some emotional changes. So we want to identify what is happening to this employee. Why is there sudden emotional change? So we have also come up with a statistical metric that measures the emotional stability of every employee in an organization. So we're not talking about financial services. This could be an app sitting within any company, right? Any enterprise. You want to look for the morale of the employees in a company. So using this tool, you can predict which employees may resign or quit their job maybe within the next 2 weeks, within a month, within the next 6 months, based on their emotional patterns, right? So this can be an excellent HR human resources tool Or sometimes what you want to do, the best practice would be if you find the negativity of an employee is increasing, you want a HR must intervene and then say, hey, how can I help you, right? Why is it that you seem to be sad or depressed? Can we help you in any way? So then we do a statistical modeling like Markov stochastic process, right, of the changes of the emotions, right? And then we do an emotional scoring. And then we also compute what are called the steady state distributions of all the employees. So in this case, we look at the steady state distributions of 6 Enron employees. They were found to be guilty. And then we found some very interesting patterns. What we found is at the top of the chain, like CEOs, CFOs, they are very good in hiding their true emotions in their emails. Their emails always sound neutral or positive, even though they could be very negative. Whereas lower in the chain in an organization, we found that they are much more upfront about their emotion. They exhibit, if they're negative, they are sad, depressed, they write that in the emails to their colleagues in the organization. Okay, so that's a very interesting observation from these data sets. So again, as I said, we have a tool that identifies high-risk employees by monitoring their emotions. So in this case, you have, let's say, this employee called April Tilson, and then we have her address, and then here is a risk score. So like July, August, September, October, right? Every month we compute the average risk score for this employee. So risk score is a combination of emotional analysis from their emails, their instant messages, their trading activities, their behavior, right? As I said, are they logging into their account at odd times, and so on and so forth. So we use all that and then have a risk score, and then we look at the risk trend. So suddenly we find that in 1 year, her risk score has increased dramatically, right? It was normal, it's about average risk score is about 50, then suddenly it's increased to 90% or 90. Then you want to know why, right? What are the factors that triggered the algorithm to have a very high risk score for this one specific employee? So we can also do an emotional breakdown in this tool. What percentage was anger, what percent was fear, sadness, disgust, and so on, right? So 96% risk score. And then you can take a number of actions. You can say, refer this person to the HR, that's a level 1 action, or refer to legal department because there's something really serious, right? Or you can say, well, I want to close the case, it's done. Action 2 would be, confirm that, yes, there's something really wrong with this person, right? Reopen the case, refer to legal, and so on and so forth. So this tool is a holistic tool. As a dashboard, it gives the emotional health, the risk scoring of every employee in a bank or an organization, helps HR keep risk and compliance, meet compliance issues. So here is another example of all these emotions. But what we also do is, of course, we know that like Facebook and Twitter, these are social media tools. So there's a social network, right? So I have 4 friends on Facebook, so I'm connected to them. So I have a social graph. What we do is we extract a social network from emails. So in my contact list on Gmail, if I have, let's say, 20 people, and then they have another 5 people in their contact list and so on, or I send emails to 5 people, I receive emails from 10 people. So we use this and we extract what's called an email social network. So this tells me who am I sending emails to most of the times, who is sending me emails most of the times, how many emails did I receive, how many emails did I send, what are the emotions of the emails that I send? Am I sending very angry, nasty emails? Am I receiving very sad, depressed emails, right? We can do that. And then we also find out, okay, am I the source of anger and sadness, for example, in an enterprise? Is it spreading? So if I started it, if I'm connected to somebody immediately via email, is it spreading to them, and is it spreading throughout the organization? So you want to find out how rapidly is it spreading, how wide is it spreading, right? So that is a risk metric that you want to measure and do something about it. So I guess I'll stop here. I'll be happy to take any questions. And of course, if you're interested in knowing more about the tool or the techniques, please feel free to send me an email, mauli@ieee.org. Thank you.
Any questions? No questions? So thank you very much. Yeah, just a minute.
Hi, this is Raghu. I just had a question around the privacy aspect of the holistic surveillance that you talked about. I know somewhere during your presentation you did mention employees working in a bank sign off on privacy.
Yes.
So, okay, so I probably don't have a complete background to that. So if that's the case, so is this tool only being used in the financial sector where, privacy is being, basically kind of written off by the employees, or how do you kind of meet other challenges in other industries?
Yeah, I know. So clearly, I mean, so banks, clearly you don't have any privacy, any financial services firm, but even other organizations, right? IT companies, for example, even there, as long as you're using, even for example, you're connecting to the Wi-Fi of the company, right? You go to your office, you connect to their Wi-Fi, you connect to their internet, Ethernet ports, or you're using their email address, correct? So let's say you work for Google and then you're using Google's email address. So that data is owned by the company.
Yeah, but when you talk about, let's say, surveillance on, an employee's chat behavior, social media like Facebook and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So how do you, really address, let's say, there is conversation happening between two employees outside the organization. Let's say, these two guys are not connecting or using, the enterprise resources and probably using their personal network, home network to connect to a Facebook and still, talking something, and probably intending to collude, probably some malicious activity, right? So how do you really address that?
That's a good point. But see, as part of the compliance process, as part of the employment agreement, they are supposed to disclose if they have a social network profile like a Facebook account and so on. They're supposed to disclose that. And as part of the compliance training, the compliance training is very clear, saying that so if you're talking about the company and so on, you are supposed to disclose all that information to the bank. So so this works. The holistic surveillance from so they're using, let's say, instead of the company's email address, they're using their Gmail, the personal email address. It becomes a bit tricky, but again, from a compliance perspective, they're supposed to disclose that. Yeah, the employees do not disclose that, then we don't have access to the data. But that's again part of compliance. Right? Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, I think somewhere still there might be some kind of gray areas which probably cannot get covered 100%.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right, sure.
I agree.
All right, thank you.
Yes. Yeah.
Hi, one related question on the privacy. See, even though we are disclosing that we are using this social media and network, my ID is this. So coming this GDPR and other regulations are in place. So are we allowed to access my mutual contacts or my mutual friends, and publishing this as a risk to the organization? How far that will be a risk to the bank or the organization who is tracking that or who is deploying the tool?
Correct. So the way the tool is deployed right now, it's deployed on premise in a bank's email server. Correct. So any email that goes in or comes out of the email server, this tool will capture that email and do this analysis, emotional analysis, rating of employees, and so on and so forth. So again, how GDPR is going to affect this, that's going to be a challenge. In fact, talking to some of the clients in Europe, banking clients, they're also trying to figure out how this is going to work for them because they are extremely interested. But again, the challenge is going to be getting access to the data, right? Yeah. So clearly, there's always a trade-off between surveillance and privacy. We would have to balance it. But at least so far in the US, if you're working for a financial services company, then these are not major issues, getting data.
Regarding that voice mechanism you told, it can be through machine learning, other thing, it can be differentiated. So within friends, there are chances that, or within relatives, the voice can be mimicked, how to identify that?
Right. So the way we do that is this. So in this case, right, so we even though we are using ideas from machine learning, but the challenge would be getting data, right? If you're using traditional machine learning where you're using a number of examples to train the algorithm to differentiate between human voice and fake voice and machine synthesis voice, then in your example, we may not have a whole lot of data, right? So for example, I may not have any data about your relatives, right? Their voice signatures. So if that is the case, then we need at least one sample from you and one sample from your relative to differentiate between these two. So so the voice signatures can be extracted, and then statistically we can differentiate between these two voice samples.
Yeah. Good evening.
Hi.
Hi. Privacy related and hosting related, you already answered. Now licensing. How do you license this product? Any demo version available?
Yeah, we have an online demo. If you could email me, we can set up an online, and then I can show. We have APIs that can be embedded within and integrated into a server, email server, for example, and then you can talk about licensing and all that maybe offline. Please send me an email to that address, mauli@ieee.org.
Does it work with all kind of email servers, including
Yes.
open source? And what is the performance impact on this?
When you say performance impact, how do you mean?
Meaning any impact on the performance of mailing or overall
I mean,
solutions?
Oh, you mean the accuracy of the algorithm? Is that?
Yeah, real performance, because it will not only be email. This engine would sit on the perimeter also.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So So if you're talking about computational resources needed, right, by performance.
Second question. Next. Next. Last question.